Hello and welcome to the final program in the current series of Power in the Wind. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have chosen to spend the next 30 minutes with my guest. In last week's program, we conducted a tour of the mill wall still standing around our island, whether as a standalone wall or one incorporated into a homestead, a case of the adaptive reuse of these mill walls. This week we shall take a look at the industrialization that occurred immediately after emancipation, when the planters were literally compensated on the heads of the enslaved. We will also take a look at the steam power, and of course we shall consider the future of the power in the wind. To do that, our resource person, Dr. Lennox Honeychurch, is standing by at the Frank Hudson Sugar Museum at the Portville Sugar Factory in St. James.
Here at the National Trust Sugar Museum at Portville, we get an excellent idea about how these steam machines operated. Of course, it was a big change from the wind. In a way, it was more reliable because you did not have to depend on the variations of the wind, and you could work well into the night without having to worry about if squalls were coming and affecting the turning of the sails of the windmill. So this installation of steel started from the 1840s, but here we have machines developing throughout the 19th century. And here we have a machine from 1881, although it was installed and started operation the following year in 1882. And the steam required these huge boilers, which have since been removed, but they were behind here, sending this pressurized steam to move these cogs and flywheels. So what you've got is your steam engines at the back, and they are leading steam through pipes into this section here. This now is building up with pressure, and this pressure sends these arms out in this direction and back again, because in here you've got the steam pumping in, pumping out, and the arms moving back and forth, so the flywheels are then turning. This then gets to move this larger flywheel in this area here, which then is attached to these cogs, which move the power onto the rollers as well, across there where the cane is actually crushed. So the steam which is powering these flywheels here, once the flywheels are spinning, they are then moving their power into this very large flywheel. And that is linked to the various cogs that then slow down the power, but essentially make it stronger, if you will. That then is connected across to the rollers that crush the cane. And once the steam boilers are continually fed, you can run throughout the day and throughout the night, and you can produce so much more of the juice necessary for the production of sugar and also for rum.
During the 1950s, 60s and 70s, a lot of the machinery used to grind sugar cane in Barbados was sold as scrap. So it is only on a few locations where you could get an idea of some of the machinery or the equipment used to crush the canes.
And in certain cases, parts of the mills have also been filled in. But here we can see the arches of the entrance to the furnaces. So you would have throughout the day and night teams of slaves and after emancipation laborers putting in fuel into here, bagasse, in some cases tree trunks and stuff, into here to feed the fire to be able to boil the boilers, or also for the steam mills to be able to boil the water to create the pressure within the steam machines to be able to power the mill. Now the great thing about steam is that you could add any number of machines and you would then be able to crush the cane repeatedly. Whereas in a windmill you would have to feed the cane back into the same mill. With steam you would then have a lineup of rollers depending on how many machines you could afford and were willing to install. And then you would repeatedly crush that cane until you got as much juice as possible out of that one load. So here we have a mill similar to this other one by the Makoni Engineering Plant in Glasgow in Scotland. Glasgow was that centre of the Industrial Revolution in the north in Scotland that produced so much of the machinery that was used in the sugar industry in Barbados. So once again, here we have it lined up. Your steam is coming in from the boilers which have been removed. They have been taken years ago for scrap, so all that we have are the major machines here. But your steam is coming in, building up pressure here, forcing these arms forward to then motivate the flywheel again and connect to the cogs, which is then connecting to another set of rollers and crushers there. So essentially what we're getting is that you would be able to have, as was here, it's been removed, you would have another set of rollers here. Your cane is fed through those rollers on that side, then it's with a belt, a set of boards coming across this way. It's then moved to this machine, this set of rollers, and you can either feed it back, or essentially what you're getting is more crushing, more juice for that one load that was coming in from the field. So therefore it's a far more efficient way of producing sugar. You're getting more juice out of those loads that are coming in from the field.
The remnants of some of that imported machinery is still found on a few spots all around the island. As you did learn in a previous program, you will find some at Lowlands in Christchurch, and St. Nicholas Abbey in St. Peter, and right here at Portville in St. James.
So here we have the remains of this cast iron, very heavy metal sheath, and this was what connected one mill to the next, one set of wheels to the next to power the rollers. So if you imagine that this is taken up here and then is connected to this, it's connected across to this, bolted in, and as this turns, it then is going to turn these cogs, this central cog, to be able to turn the rollers, to be able to crush the cane. And this entire machine was repeated down in this section here. It has since been removed. You are feeding the cane through here. Cane was coming through and then was moved on to this set of rollers, crushed again, and then moved on. The bagasse would go off and the juice would go into the boiling house and would be prepared there for the boilers to be made into sugar, and the other aspects of the process would then continue.
With the compensation money all paid to the planters and the onset of industrialization, the rollers inside of the mills also went through a major change.
So what we're seeing is a technological movement from the 1650s, 1660s, when we get the beginning of the windmills, with your upright rollers, some of them made of hardwood, later on hardwood covered in metal, and then the smooth rollers which were standing up in the windmills, and in the horizontal rollers that were attached to the windmill, you get the beginning of these indentations in the roller itself. And this is actually producing, the whole effort was to find out how much more juice you could extract. What kind of technology could you use to extract as much juice as possible from one load or one sheaf of cane? And this was one of their aspects here. They worked it out that if you had the teeth of the rollers linking in, pressing the cane down even stronger than just a smooth set of rollers, you were then getting more juice to come out. It would be going down into the pan and then going into the boiling house to continue the process. But you would then be able, in spite of the fact that you had these very close rollers and you had these ribs within the rollers, you then move them to the next set to get even more juice as well. The whole idea of this was to extract as much juice as possible. The more juice you extracted, the more sugar you made, the more efficient your plantation was. And so, from the 1840s, what we're seeing happening in Barbados, from the first mill at Newcastle in St. John, we're getting throughout the 19th century the growth, the expansion, the abandonment of windmills, and the movement to invest into the steam mill. And by 1911, we have some 108 of these steam mills working across Barbados.
Though greater efficiency in terms of profits only, there was a major drawback of this new operation. Whereas the power in the wind was environmentally friendly and freely available and renewable, the new form of energy used to crush canes required fuel such as coal and the deforestation of the island so that the wood could be burned and energy generated in the steam mill.
The problem was, the wind was free, but what these required were two important components: water and fuel, whether it was wood from the usually imported. If they had stripped everything they could on Barbados itself, you will see the early photographs of Barbados in the late 19th, early 20th century. The land is very barren in places that even today has forest. You see the hillsides in the Scotland district and so bare, because almost every possible piece of wood that could be found was being put into the boilers to create the steam to make these machines work. They then began importing them from the Windward Islands, from places like St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Dominica. Wood was imported to Barbados. And also, in certain cases, although very expensive, coal from the Midlands in Britain itself, brought across the Atlantic, stored by the pierhead and along the mouth of the Corinage, and then brought up in carts to some of these sugar factories. But that was a very expensive operation, and it was not common in many of the steam mills. We also have to remember that this investment was coming from the compensation which the planters had received on emancipation for the loss, so-called, of their property, which were their slaves. This money was then reinvested here in Barbados by the people who lived and worked in Barbados. The absentee owners, they took their compensation money and invested it in British industry. But here in Barbados, the plantocracy reinvested that compensation money into the expansion of the technology of sugar so that they could continue to make more money. And it is from that period of the 1840s that we see the renovation of the windmill and the installation of steam, the investment into more modern equipment to utilize and to produce more sugar.
Although the equipment and machinery were changed, the physical structure of the mill walls remained and became an iconic feature all around the island. In 1973, when the Central Bank of Barbados issued its own coinage, coins were introduced in denominations of 1 cent, 5 cent, 10 cent, 25 cents and $1 coin. A windmill was featured on the 25-cent coin, and on May 2, 2013, the Central Bank of Barbados issued a new series of banknotes. The revised $2 note featured the iconic Morgan Lewis windmill. The windmill has become so much a part of our people that it is now manifested in many of our cultural expressions. In 2016, the Young Spirits Community Band portrayed the iconic Morgan Lewis windmill during Kitty's Kadooment held at the National Stadium.
We got the windmill, and we got the donkey. Yeah. Today, Solene and Kaden remind us of the journey to the modern development of the sugar industry. And from the days when sugar was king.
Although there was a move away from power in the wind to steam energy, over time we have come to realize that the power in the wind is environmentally friendly and it is renewable. Thankfully, that wind which has blown across our island for thousands of years is still available to us today, allowing us to break that dependency on energy that is not renewable. Now, speaking about breaking that dependency, Dr. Honeychurch introduces this segment of the program in an area here in Barbados that is synonymous with independence.
Here we are at the Garrison Savannah, where 50 years ago, seconds into the 30th of November 1966, the flag, the broken trident, went up to create a new nation in the world, one of the many small island states that were popping up across the planet. The last windmill stopped operation in Barbados 20 years before, in 1946. And just a few years after independence, the world collapsed into an oil crisis. The whole question of future survival on fossil fuels was brought into play. Barbados and all the other states around the world, particularly small island states, were affected by what was happening in the international oil market. Today, 50 years after independence, the questions about energy and appropriate technology still stands. In fact, it's probably becoming even more intense as we realize that the global market in oil rises and falls, dislocates economies, and especially small economies like ours here. And therefore, the question of looking again at what natural power we have got is even more urgent and intense. Here at the Garrison, we can feel that power of the trade winds coming across this land as it has for thousands of years. It's free. The energy is there, constant. Combine that to the sun and the technology that has been developed for solar power, and really there are great opportunities for us here in Barbados to at least, not necessarily totally turn to those types of technologies and power and energy supply, but at least to provide some sort of safeguard for our dependence on imported fossil fuel like diesel and petroleum. And so that is why it has been important throughout this series to look at the fact that this island, this country, this economy survived for 300 years on the basis of the power of the wind. It was from the wind that they got the energy to be able to establish the sugar industry, which, for all its terrors of slavery, of all of its economic and other unfairness, let this country set the foundations for the economy that we have today. And so, it is an appropriate time, this 50th anniversary of independence, to look again, very seriously indeed, about the use of wind power once more. There must be about 120 mill walls lying idle across the island. We don't call for reusing them. Certainly, the evidence that we have at Morgan Lewis, the fact that a lot of energy has been put into the repair of this so that we, present generations, visitors to the island, can see how that power worked. But then it gives us the ideas and the knowledge and the increased development of technology to be able to use similar power for present-day uses. There is, in islands close to us, in the French Caribbean, in the islands of Guadeloupe, the sister island of Marie-Galante, and even the small islands that we hardly hear about, Les Saintes, 5 islands off the French territory of Guadeloupe. Those places are being powered by giant wind turbines. And there's a possibility for us here. All along the east coast, we have got the clear movement of breeze. And there is the possibility even for individual businesses and households to be able to develop this technology for those particular areas, even if it's private households or small industry or hotels. Already, we see panels being laid down for the hotel industry, for other businesses. Huge swathes of rooftops are now being covered with solar panels to provide a balance to the energy and to the costs of running these various enterprises and homes. And so this is the time, 50th anniversary of independence, 50 years when we have more or less been relaxed about this whole question of energy, tossed now and then by the changes in world prices for oil. And it has become far more serious. And so, at the end of this program, it's been a great pleasure taking you through the highways and byways of Barbados, across the mill walls, describing their origin, the investment that was coming in from the Dutch and from the Jews and from British investment into the sugar industry, and the power of the wind that was supplying the energy for that cane industry that survived for 300 years and more. And so now is the time to look seriously, earnestly at that alternative energy, that free energy, that once you have put in the investment of the equipment, it runs constantly day and night across the hills and fields of Barbados to create a new day, new energy for this small, independent island in a troubled and contested world. It's been a pleasure being with you. I'd like to thank Sherwood McCaskey and Kevin for being such great support, and all the cameramen who supported this program. Let's think about it. Let's think about energy and the power in the wind.
And thank you, Dr. Honeychurch, for sharing your research findings so generously with all of us. And thanks to you, the viewers. Now, it is renewable and it is environmentally friendly. May we not only consider it, may we make very good use of this power in the wind. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Until my next series, it's goodbye for now.